Phil McGrane, how are you?
Good. How are you, man?
I should say Secretary of State Phil McGrane. I'm sorry. Secretary of State Phil McGrane. You have the pin, though. The pin is
that
good.
makes it official, right?
Makes it official. God bless America. Listen, we have the election coming up, and there is nothing hotter around election time besides MAGA flags and talking about voter integrity. Like, this is what I've realized. People are getting varied MAGA flags. They're getting, like, different. I saw a MAGA flag the other day with Trump and an eagle, and like it was wild.
Just
I was
America on steroids.
Oh my God, it was it, man. And great, awesome, great, have your flag. But voter integrity is something that I really, really care about because for obvious reasons, as do you, but for obvious reasons, the less people believe in the election system, the fewer people are going to vote, the worse results we're going to get, the more jaded and frustrated people will get. Like, it's a vicious cycle down to like death and destruction. So we're talking about voter integrity today. And what you guys are doing in the state of Idaho. There was actually something at the end of the last session that I wanted to chat with you about. But again, let's just start off with voter integrity.
That sounds great. That sounds a great spot to start. I think, one of the things, exactly what you said, and I think back to the Eagle Mayor's race last year, is one of the biggest things is just people having confidence in whoever their leaders are, that they were selected fairly, whether it's the person they wanted or not. Being able to say, like, yes, my vote counted. I got to participate in the process. I could see it was transparent. I can have confidence that, yep, all the votes counted. Here we are, and we're going to go get it next time. Or, hey, we're going to now lead the community whatever way. So it doesn't matter whether it's a mayor, whether it's a governor, whether it's president. We got to have a system that works.
Right. To that end, one thing that I find very interesting about people's beliefs with voting is that they are derived predominantly outside of empirical evidence. And what I mean by that is, like, I've never had a bad voting experience. My dad has never had a bad voting experience, but my dad feels very, very strongly about problems in our voting system or the potential. I remember he was telling me years back, he was like, oh yeah, there was plenty of voter fraud during JFK's election. Like, there was? Like, we didn't even have iPhones to talk about it. Like, how did you determine that there is plenty of voter fraud? And again, I'm not saying he's wrong. I have no idea. But it's interesting to me that people have derived this opinion of the efficacy of the voting system without ever individually having a bad experience.
I think it's reflective of a lot of things going on in the United States. It's the same symptom here in our election spaces when we always say, like, Congress sucks, but my congressman doesn't. The same thing when we've done some polling regarding election integrity and just people's confidence in the process. People have a lot of confidence in their local poll workers. Those ladies that you see when you walk in, people are like, oh yeah, I know Betty. Like, she does a great job. She's always been there. Same thing when we look at the county clerk. I mean, you've talked to Trent plenty of times. When we sit with the county clerk, there's really high trust among county clerks. And that's not just here in Idaho, that's across the country. And the further removed you get, though, so I think most voters here in the state of Idaho have gone to their polling place, especially if they've come from somewhere else and they said, oh, this system works great. What we have is great. Why don't we do that everywhere else? I mean, you and I have participated in some of those conversations. And the challenge, too, is it just gets more removed, even though in many instances, not all, but many instances, the same processes are happening everywhere. Like, there are some basic things that we are all doing. Our office has really been trying to highlight specifically what we're doing in Idaho. I mean, I think that's one of the things we'll talk about here. But so many of those same things, like not having machines connected to the internet, having a paper record for all the votes that are cast, those are practices, not universally, but pretty damn close across the country.
Speaking of things connected to the internet, as somebody told me the other day that, and we're not here to talk about Prop 1, but one of the things that somebody told me, they're like, well, doesn't Prop 1 bring in Dominion voting machines? I'm like, no. Like, it's
more nuanced than that. Right. One of the worst words in politics these days is nuance. So in terms of Proposition 1, I wrote a letter to the legislature outlining some of the logistics related to it. One of those questions was the equipment we currently use. Dominion does not do business in the state of Idaho. No counties use it in the state of Idaho. But Dominion is not the only one of the companies that can do a ranked choice voting ballot. So we would have to replace our equipment if Prop 1 passes. That's where you see like cost estimates and other things come in. But there are other options. There are vendors. Hart InterCivic is a vendor we currently use. They also have a system coming online that can do ranked choice voting ballots.
Okay, so the reality is we would have to replace equipment, and yes. Dominion would be one vendor.
They would be one of the bidders. It would be a competitive bid. I'm sure Dominion. I can't say with certainty, but most likely they would bid.
Okay, can you? Okay, we'll have to
Yeah,
talk
yeah, yeah.
about
That's
that.
a whole like
Like
you
going down a rabbit hole. But one of the big things that is unique to Idaho compared to other states, for instance, Alaska. Alaska doesn't have counties, but Idaho has counties, which means individual counties are responsible for their individual voting mechanisms, right? So, like Canyon County has a Canyon County clerk, and Ada County has an Ada County clerk, and both of those clerks are in charge of getting the vote correct in their particular area, and they get to do it however they want. Obviously guaranteeing some kind of quality.
Yeah, we still really use a model from statehood in terms of how we run our elections. It's done exactly like you said. The county clerks are the chief election official in each of their counties. They're the ones who recruit the poll workers. They're the ones who set up their precincts and polling places and everything else. And honestly, as we prepare for the election, they're the ones, the boots on the ground. Like the closer you get to the polling place, the more likely that's who's actually enforcing our election laws. So our poll workers play a really big role. I serve as the chief election official for the entire state. But as you can appreciate, I'm further removed from actually issuing a ballot to anybody. I'm overseeing the process and dealing with some of the bigger issues or making sure that there's consistency between the counties. But that model that we have works really well because when you look at the geography of Idaho, there are differences. There's a big difference being here in Ada County than there is being in Clark County or Custer County. I serve, one of the unique capacities I serve in is related to cybersecurity. And yes, I think it's important to note, like, if anyone's watched the presidential campaign, Iran has hacked into the Trump campaign and shared information with the Harris campaign. That's not insignificant when you have nation states trying to meddle in our politics. Those same nation states are trying to touch our election systems. So cybersecurity is a big deal.
Can you back up? When did that happen?
That happened a couple weeks ago. I mean, this is, I'll say Google it, but I mean, national news. It did happen. It's been confirmed by the feds. We had Director Easterly here last week meeting with me to talk about cybersecurity and our preparations. That's where not being connected to the internet becomes really, really important. The best way to keep Iran or China or Russia out is to not be connected. I share that, though. I share that not to get sidetracked on talking about those countries, but when I talk nationally with my peers, one of the biggest things I've been an advocate for is rural parts of the country. Specifically, I keep highlighting Custer County. So Custer County, for those who aren't familiar, is right in the center of the state. It's basically the Stanley area. Challis is its county seat. Custer County is 4,900 square miles in terms of its geography, meaning it's about 5 times the size of Rhode Island. It's more than twice the size of Delaware. There are 4,200 people, so that means there's more than a square mile per person. And I think the people who live in Custer County like it that way. They'd prefer probably 2 or 3 square miles per person if they had their way. It's also right in the center of the Sawtooth, so some of the most mountainous country. And when you have that, both geography and that population, where do you find a cybersecurity professional to help make sure no one is meddling in your system? It's at least a 3-hour drive to Twin Falls or Boise to get support. And that's where, as a state, we've been working towards broadband in most of the state. The problem is when you bring the internet, you also bring Russia and China and Iran with you. And so we have to put the safeguards in place. And sometimes the simplest solution is the best solution. Cut the cord, don't have it connected to the internet. Depending on the community, some of our communities are big enough, they have to take steps to bring all those ballots together at a county level. Other counties, we still have counties that hand count every single race. We have 2 counties that have less than 350 registered voters. So there's 2 counties with less than 350 registered voters, 8 counties over 300,000 registered voters, and we have to have a model and a system that works for all of these people.
With that being said, you guys have focused on 3 really specific things recently, articulating to individuals why elections are easy, why they're safe, and why they're secure. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so why voting is easy. One of the things in Idaho that we're really fortunate is, each state does things differently, but we are fortunate. Most of Idahoans are going to vote on Election Day at the polls, just the traditional way that most people are familiar with. But we also have absentee voting available to anybody who needs it. So if someone's working that day, if someone's traveling, they can still vote. And similarly, if any Idahoan wants to, they can go vote in person prior to Election Day. So we have early voting. Not all states have all 3 of those options. We're fortunate to have all 3 and have good, robust systems. So trying to make sure we can register people to vote, vote. You and I were talking before. We've got the Idaho voter pamphlet that has just hit mailboxes to everybody to make sure they have the information.
Is this one of your first statewide voter guides?
So it's not a voter guide. I mean, there's nuanced here. It doesn't include candidate information. What I wish, the only addition to this, it has the constitutional amendment in there. It has Proposition 1. For both of them, it has pro and con arguments. I know you're talking to a lot of people about these issues.
A ton. And the arguments are so vast. Like the conversations are, 45 minutes or an hour. And it's like, God, every time I have a new one on, I'm like, I had never thought about that. Yeah, it's very complex.
Well, and there's plenty of Idahoans who aren't following in this level of detail. If you talk to the politicos, everyone's dialed in, right? But as we get closer, more people will be paying attention. And I think it's interesting. This is good to give the actual information to voters. I think Proposition 1 is a perfect example. I really do believe some Idahoans are going to be confused when they get to the polls, because if you look at the conversation and the conversation you're leading and having a part in, the advocates for it really focus heavily on the open primary piece and the changes to the primary system, which is part of Proposition 1. The opponents to it really focus heavily on the changes to the general election and ranked choice voting. And I think there's plenty of people who hear these things or see the signs or whatever and believe that they're two different issues.
Right.
And when actually, and this is where the voter pamphlet comes in handy, it's one issue combined with parts that some people like and some people hate. And it makes the decision making a little bit harder for Idahoans to be able to say, like, oh, I don't get to cherry pick. I just get a question, yes or no. And so hopefully the information in the voter pamphlet is helpful. But beyond that, so there's really some cool things that we have. It shows all the information about registering, everything else. But one of the big things our office has done for this election for the first time is if you go to voteidaho.gov, you can view a sample ballot. This is the first time statewide that you can actually go see a sample of your ballot. It'll be the exact same ballot you're going to vote on. The candidates will be in the same order, everything else, so that voters can hopefully make an informed decision. You and I know that going back to your MAGA flags at the beginning, everyone knows there's a presidential election.
Right.
And it's,
right.
And that's what's
they got the flags. Both the neighbors.
That's what's going to drive people out, right? Is the presidential election is going to bring people to the polls.
Right.
I don't think Idaho is quite as exciting as some of those battleground states around the country in terms of the presidential election, but it's what's going to get people to show up. Similarly, I think Proposition 1 will drive a lot of attention to the election. But that's not the only thing people are going to be voting on.
Right.
We have legislative races. Right. We have county races. I mean, you've had the sheriff in here and others talking. We have Ada County Highway District, some very important races. I mean, lots of people have thoughts about ACHD. And so hopefully voters can get the information and know when they finally get that pen in their hand and the ballot, they're like, oh, this is who I want, right? I actually know something rather than, I always love to share. I don't know if I shared this last time we're here is, I did a campaign school probably 10 years ago with Wendy Horman. So she's now the chair of JFAC, one of the co-chairs. But she told this story about when she went into her hairdresser one time, the woman at the front desk said, you look really familiar. And Wendy's like, well, I serve in the legislature, that kind of conversation. The woman's like, no, that's not it. Like, No,
I think you were at Albertsons last week.
Humility is important for everybody in politics, right? Everyone needs their humbling moments in life.
No, that's not it.
Well, they continue to check in the transaction. About 3 minutes later, the woman looks up and she's like, wait, you're right. Your last name's Horman. My maiden name is Norman. I voted for you. And too often, I think some of the decisions that are made can boil down to, oh, this is really familiar. I don't know why, and so one of my goals is to give people, the whole idea of our republic is that people are selecting leaders that represent them to head to the state house, to head to city hall. But you can only do that if you know who you're voting for. And I think your podcast has been an awesome platform for that, is to get information out to people, because you've had, going into the primary, you had candidates left and right, and sometimes surprises for people like, oh, this person is thoughtful about what they're doing. Just in the narrative, I didn't even know who they were. Right.
And actually, to that point, being able to see your ballot and be educated, Trent, I had Trent Triple on, and I knew that I could get a copy of my ballot in Ada County, which I was very excited about. I was like, great. And of course I didn't do it because I was like, oh, that's awesome. But I already know who I'm voting for. I have this idea. It's like, no. I know who I'm going, because I had interviewed a bunch of these candidates, right? And then I get there and they were asking me things that I had no
That
idea.
you didn't know?
No, but
And you're
no.
like way more informed.
I
way
know,
more informed.
but I literally thought, I was like, I've interviewed everyone. I know, but there were races on there or questions on there. I'm like, oh, I didn't even know I was going to be asked this. Like, I can't emphasize enough. It would have been intelligent of me to do it. I'm going to do it this time. It is such a valuable thing because it was like half of it I knew just with my eyes closed, and then the other half was like, bod, it rhymes with Todd. Like, here we go. Like,
see, exactly.
Whatever.
I think that's going in. Most people are going to probably feel similar because they know who they're going to vote for president.
Right.
And they may know the political party. Jersey color matters a lot these days.
Yeah.
But there are going to be questions where they're not party affiliations on the ballot because they're nonpartisan seats. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, crap. I think last time we talked about it, the ACHD, I always highlight 2020, we had a recount. It was 2 votes apart out of 40,000 votes cast. Razor thin margin, less than 0.005% difference. I mean, it's a great example of how our system works because we did the recount. We went through it all. Everything stood up. So in terms of confidence, I think it's important. But more important to this conversation is, well, it was 2 votes apart, and any candidate can find 2 people who didn't vote. That's pretty effortless. What was really shocking is 10,000 people skipped the question. 10,000 people who showed up and voted and casted a ballot, they were just kind of like, I don't know who these people are. And so they skipped it. Despite that decision has big implications in terms of the direction. Where is road construction going to be taken care of or not?
Right. I've been going downtown a lot just to meet with various people, and it's like, it's such a train wreck.
There's a moat
horrific.
right around the Capitol.
Oh
Yes.
my God. It is as insane. You mentioned last time we spoke, you were like, I don't even know the best way to get to my parking spot yet. And it changes every day. And literally I've gone down, I think it's like 3 or 4 times now I've had to go downtown in the last couple months. And every time I get taken a different way. It's like the different pile of something over here and a different block there. I'm just trying to go down and get a bowl of pho. Like, it's a train wreck. I wanted to ask you there with regard to secure voting, and this is a really big thing for people. The mechanisms, let's use like Ada County, for instance, the mechanisms that they use to collect votes, tabulate them, sort them, the whole thing. Those are all air gapped. Like, everything is air gapped from the
specifically all of voting. So any vote that you cast is never ever connected to the internet. Like, even to get the results out to the public, we have to take special steps to get that information out of the system and then go to a network system to share that information public. It's why you don't see results coming in quickly in real time. It's because of the security measures. Exactly.
Right. And I actually was fortunate enough to do a tour with Trent of the Ada County election system. And they have this room that's like, there's like a special lock or something.
Yep,
and it's
like
limited
access, who can get in there, everything. Yep.
Right. So all the votes get tabulated with like fences and like there's that gigantic machine, Bessie, which is hilarious, right? And it's this gigantic machine that just sorts and tabulates all these things, all air gapped. And then you go into the actual sorting room where there's like these specialized computers that, have one cord coming down from the ceiling. That's just a power cord. And then they take the data on a stick. You guys provide them with the stick, right?
We do. Yep.
So they take that data from their computers with a memory stick provided by you and go into that limited access room. And that's the only spot in the entire place that has internet access. And that's where they transfer the information from the stick to you guys and then confirm, once it's transferred, that what appears on your screen is in fact what they sent. Yeah. So it's like there's this tiny little step that engages the internet, and it's checked on and from the sender and receiver like instantaneously. It's like, okay, this is what I sent you. This is what you're reading. We're good. Goodbye.
Yeah, they both check it there, but there's also so much testing. They do a ton of testing beforehand, not just on the security, like making sure there's no tampering, but also testing it on the front end to make sure that every vote gets assigned to the right person. A vote for Donald Trump should go to Donald Trump. I mean, you've talked to Trent about ballot verifier. It's a good example of highlighting that, yes, we make sure that everything is reporting accurately. And that's at the county level. At the state level and at the federal level, we're testing that equipment, running it through the ringer. Before even the Trent Triples can acquire the equipment, it has to go through testing and certification for use. And I think those are some of the examples of the things we're doing. In terms of securing our elections, though, we have some really common sense solutions for our state. We've already talked about no internet connectivity. That's a pretty common sense solution. Why try to fight with hackers elsewhere when you can just air gap it, cut the cord? But also we have photo ID. So anyone who registers to vote in Idaho needs to show photo ID and proof of residence. Every voter will be asked to show photo ID when they vote. Also, there's a paper record. So every Idahoan will be voting in some form or fashion, and there will be a paper record of their votes that they will stick in a ballot box.
Can we go back to the registering to vote just real fast? Because identification is one of those things that like instantaneously people are like, IDs. So to register to vote in Idaho, you need a valid identification. Now, you don't necessarily need to bring that additional identification when you go to actually vote.
No,
right?
You should bring your ID. Bring your ID when you vote.
I'm not saying it's a bad idea to bring your ID, but there is an affidavit option.
So to register, good question. So to register to vote, yes, you need valid ID to register. Right. There is no affidavit. There is no alternative.
Right.
You must show ID.
And these are two different things, right? Registering to vote and then showing up to vote. Again, two different, because I got these confused in years past, which is like, hey, wait a minute, you don't need an ID to vote because there's this affidavit option. That's inaccurate because to register to vote, you have to have your ID. And then once you're in the system, then once you go, and the affidavit, it's my understanding, is used by like less than 1% of the population
way
voting.
Less than that,
But those people already showed ID to register to vote. And those IDs come from the predominantly driver's licenses, passports, things like that. And the driver's licenses are things issued by ITD, right?
Yeah, so it used to be more broad. 2 years ago, we changed the registration requirements to really tighten up the ID. So it is government issued ID, specifically Idaho driver's licenses or Idaho ID cards. Overwhelmingly, people use their driver's license. So 98.8% of voters in the 2022 election used a driver's license to prove their identity. And that's not just for registering. That's also for showing up and voting. Most people, if they went to their polling location or went to an early voting site, checked in, showed their ID, the tools we now use, the electronic poll books, they actually scan the barcode on the back of your ID. It makes it faster for you because it finds your record really quick, but it also validates that, yep, we've got Matt Todd in front of us, and here's the ballot he needs. He lives over in Dry Creek, so here we go.
Two things. The electronic poll books to scan, those are the only thing in the voting area that are connected to the internet, correct?
We have two primary systems. So we've talked a lot about the voting system. So when we say voting system, we mean the system that creates the ballots, that counts the ballots, that reads your votes, all of that. That's the air-gapped system, the hyper-secure room that Trent was showing you around in, all of that. And then we have the voter rolls. So everyone is very familiar, voter roll cleanup, the conversations there. The voter rolls are networked. That's a network that we manage and maintain security on. The voter rolls, it's important that we do because one of the ways we prevent people or catch people from voting twice or anything else is how we manage and monitor. So there is never a connection between who is voting and how they voted. I don't get to know what choices you made. We have a constitutional right to protect your secret ballot. Part of keeping the system separate is to protect that right, but it's also for security purposes. The actual vote counting, where someone wants to manipulate the process, we have that air-gapped. On this other process, we have it networked so that we can move Idahoans, because people are moving all the time, so that we can check to make sure there are no felons on our voter rolls, so that we can check to make sure the driver's license is valid, that when people die, we're removing them from the voter rolls. Recently, one of the big things that we're working on in our office is citizenship, to verify people's citizenship. We're working very closely right now with Department of Homeland Security to make sure there are no non-citizens voting in our elections. Those are all important processes, and that our office really puts a lot of energy into overseeing so that people can be confident in the election.
Excuse me. And it's also something to make sure that if somebody on the day of the election, if somebody drops into the mail a ballot and then walks into a voting area and says like, hey, I would like to vote, the second that person votes in person, it will notify the system so that the mail-in ballot becomes no longer valid. And if the mail-in ballot gets there first and the person walks inside to vote, they'll know instantly at the volunteers will be like, oh, you've already voted. Like you don't get a
so it's great because exactly that example, it doesn't matter what way, if someone were to try to vote twice, intentionally, unintentionally, doesn't really matter. It catches it. It doesn't just catch it so that we can go after somebody or anything. It also stops it. Like the second ballot will not get counted. Because we already know about it. And similarly, it doesn't just do it here, like say in Trent's shop in Ada County. We've had cases when I was the county clerk where someone votes over in Idaho Falls in Bonneville County and then also tries to vote here. And like we instantly know because we're sharing all this information. Our system over the last, I would say 10 years, but really especially the last 5 years, has gotten so much more robust in terms of being able to do this data sharing. That's been one of the big projects I've been involved in, is this data validation to make sure that we are checking not just non-citizens, but also felons, other groups of people. So
Gotcha. Secretary of State, I got to let you go. I know you have a quick time. I would love to have you back. Obviously we just briefly touched on a couple things, but thank you for taking the time today. Is there anything you'd like to say in closing?
I just want people, get your voter pamphlet, study up, listen to the Ranch podcast, get informed, and then make sure we want to have record turnout this election, and we're really gearing up for it.
Wonderful. Thank you for coming in. And again, let's do it again.